Do you think the United States would negotiate with Iran if Iran weren't a military power? That single question reveals everything. How strong is Iran's military? Strong enough to deter global powers, or only strong enough to look that way? Because behind the headlines, missiles, and sanctions lies a far more complex military reality one most people never talk about. When you think of Iran's military power, what comes to mind? Most likely the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, ballistic missiles, or proxy forces. That's what we hear about in the news again and again. But this picture is incomplete. As many people know, Iran actually has two separate armies. One is the ideological sword of the regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. The other is the force tasked with defending the homeland itself. The Islamic Republic of Iran Army, known as the Artesh. In this video, we will focus on this lesser-known actor of Iran's military structure, an institution that rarely makes headlines, but plays a critical role behind the scenes. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. If you're ready, let's begin. The difference between the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard. Iran is one of the few countries in the world with a parallel armed forces structure. Both the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Iranian army maintain their own ground forces, naval forces, air defense units, and air forces. The roots of this dual structure go back to the 1979 revolution. Iran's main army is a conventional force inherited from the Pahlavi era. Article 143 of the Iranian Constitution clearly defines its mission: to defend the country's territorial integrity and independence against external threats. It has no political mandate. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, on the other hand, was established in April 1979, less than 5 months after the revolution itself. Article 150 of the Constitution defines its mission as protecting the revolution and its achievements. This is the critical distinction. The Iranian army protects the state, while the Revolutionary Guard protects the regime. At least until the recent 12-day confrontation with Israel, this division was clearly reflected in practice. Border security and conventional warfare fell under the responsibility of the Iranian army, while the missile program, regional proxy forces, and strategic deterrence were controlled by the Revolutionary Guard. In internal security operations, the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard generally do not interfere in each other's domains. In the public perception, this division has shaped the idea of a people's army versus a regime's army. The Iranian army's distance from politics grants it a higher level of social legitimacy compared to the Revolutionary Guard. The roots of the Iranian army stretch back to the very foundation of the modern Iranian state. In 1921, Reza Khan, then commander of the Cossack Brigade, carried out a coup d'état. When he established the Pahlavi dynasty in 1925, his first priority was to restructure the army along European lines. Mandatory conscription was introduced. The power of tribal militias was broken. A centralized national armed force was built. During the reign of Mohammad Reza Shah, the Iranian army became one of the strongest military forces in the region. By the 1970s, Iran was the largest arms customer of the United States. It was also the only country outside the U.S. to operate the F-14 Tomcat fighter jet. At the time, the Iranian army was the undisputed guardian of the Persian Gulf. The 1979 revolution turned everything upside down. The new regime viewed the Iranian army, perceived as loyal to the Shah, as a threat. The purge was ruthless. Hundreds of generals and senior officers were executed, imprisoned, or forced into exile. Tens of thousands of officers were expelled from the military. Within just a few months, the Iranian army lost most of its command structure. Then Saddam Hussein attacked. The Iran-Iraq War, which began in September 1980, paradoxically reaffirmed the Iranian army's reason for existence. The Revolutionary Guard fought with ideological motivation, but lacked conventional warfare experience. Air defense, armored units, and naval operations were carried almost entirely by the Iranian army. The 8-year war restored the purged army's legitimacy. However, After 1988, the balance shifted once again. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps built a vast economic empire. It took control of missile and drone programs and became the sole authority over regional operations. The Iranian army, constrained by sanctions and aging equipment, was pushed into a limited homeland security role. Today, the Iranian army still retains its historical prestige, but it has lost its strategic weight to the Revolutionary Guard. The Iranian army has a classic conventional force structure, consisting of ground forces, air forces, and naval forces. Its total active personnel stands at approximately 420,000, making it one of the largest conventional armies in the region. The ground forces are the largest component of the Iranian army, with roughly 350,000 personnel. They are organized into infantry, armored, and mechanized divisions spread across 4 military regions. Their primary areas of responsibility include the Iraq and Afghanistan borders, as well as the Persian Gulf coastline. However, the armored inventory is severely outdated. British-made Chieftain tanks and American M60 tanks remain in active service. Domestically produced main battle tanks exist, but only in limited numbers. The Air Force is the most prestigious, yet also the most problematic, branch of the Iranian army. Fleets of F-14, F-4, and F-5 aircraft inherited from the Shah era still form its backbone. Due to decades of sanctions, access to spare parts has been a chronic issue. Aircraft readiness rates are low. Pilots are limited to a small number of sorties, often flying with restricted fuel loads. Efforts to acquire next-generation fighter jets have produced no concrete results so far. Beyond ongoing discussions with Russia, the overall picture is clear. The Iranian army is large on paper, but significantly behind in terms of modernization. Sanctions, budgetary constraints, and the priority given to the Revolutionary Guard have effectively confined the Iranian army to a defensive posture. The relationship between the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard. So, is the relationship between the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard one of rivalry or cooperation? The short answer, both. There is a structural tension between the Iranian army and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. But this tension is not a flaw. It is part of the system's design. First, it must be stated clearly. Both forces are formally subordinate to the same General Staff, which reports directly to the Supreme Leader. On paper, this provides a coordination mechanism. In practice, however, the reality is far more complex. The competitive side of the relationship is unmistakable. First, the budget. The Revolutionary Guard enjoys strategic priority and receives the lion's share of resources. Missile programs, drone production, and Quds Force operations are all funded through the IRGC budget. What remains for the Iranian army is barely sufficient to cover personnel salaries and the maintenance of existing systems. Second, prestige. IRGC commanders are highly visible in the media, in politics, and in the economy. Iranian army generals, by contrast, are deliberately kept out of the spotlight. Third, cultural division. Iranian army officers see themselves as professional soldiers, shaped by conventional and largely Western military traditions. The Revolutionary Guard, on the other hand, is an ideological organization, where loyalty to the revolution and religious credentials weigh heavily in promotion decisions. These two institutional cultures can create friction during joint operations. The regime manages this tension, but it does not seek to eliminate it, because it doesn't want to. The mutual balancing of two armed forces ensures that neither can threaten the regime on its own. This has been the system's security insurance policy since 1979. Iran has mandatory military service, lasting approximately 24 months, which force conscripts are assigned to depends on several factors. Iranian army reflects a broader cross-section of society. Conscripts from large cities and diverse socioeconomic backgrounds typically serve here. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps requires ideological suitability, family background, religious commitment, and loyalty to the regime are key criteria. Recruits are often drawn from more conservative, regime-aligned families. Among professional officers, the distinction becomes even clearer. The Iranian army prioritizes professional competence and military qualifications, while the Revolutionary Guard places greater emphasis on ideological loyalty. There is also a significant economic dimension. Membership in the IRGC provides access to broader economic opportunities through the organization's extensive business networks. Within the current system, the Iranian army is not expected to undergo major modernization or expansion, because the regime remains wary of it. Yet despite these constraints, the Iranian army, with its conventional capabilities and relatively higher level of social legitimacy, continues to be an indispensable actor in Iran's security equation. The Revolutionary Guard, on the other hand, functions as the force responsible for protecting the Islamic regime itself. An ideological, quasi-sectarian military structure designed to stand not only above the army, but ultimately against both the army and society.